In the pre-dawn hours of June 28th, elite counterterrorism forces sealed off Baghdad's Green Zone and launched coordinated raids targeting 12 members of parliament and dozens other government officials and business figures. Omar, how big a deal are these arrests?
Big enough that some are calling it Iraq's version of Mohammed bin Salman's Ritz-Carlton purge in 2017.
For decades, corruption has squandered Iraq's wealth and held back its potential. Today, we examine whether this new crackdown against corruption can finally reform the system or simply reshuffle who controls it. Salam, dear friends. I'm Erik Gustafson with Epic, and I'm joined by my colleague, Omar Al-Nidawi. How are you, Omar?
I'm doing well, Eric. Thank you.
Well, before we get into the sweeping corruption arrests in Baghdad, a brief update on the war. Over the last several days, the United States and Iran carried out the largest exchange of strikes since last month's preliminary ceasefire agreement. The immediate trigger was a series of attacks on three commercial vessels in the Strait of Hormuz, attacks that Washington attributed to Iran. But the deeper dispute is over control of the strait. Iran has insisted that commercial ships use the route under its authority, while the United States has supported passage through a route closer to Oman. The latest exchange now appears to have paused, but the underlying conflict remains unresolved. Did any of the latest exchange reach Iraq? And what did the Iran backed militias in Iraq do during the fighting? Did they take part, make threats, or quietly remain on the sidelines?
Thankfully, it did not reach Iraq in kinetic ways, so to speak. Iraq was busy, along with the government and the militias, the Popular Mobilization Forces, and a lot of the Iranian authorities as well, in preparations for the funeral processions for the late Ali Khamenei that passed through Najaf and Karbala earlier this week. So that was a major distraction for folks in Baghdad. And also, the government has been rather busy trying to repair relations with the Gulf Cooperation countries, with Iraq's Arab neighbors, and with Washington ahead of Prime Minister Ali Zaidi's visit to the White House, which is expected to begin this week.
So let's start with context. Corruption in Iraq is not simply a matter of individual officials taking bribes, it is embedded in the post 2003 political order. How does that system work, and why has it proven so resistant to reform?
Well, absolutely. I mean, Iraq's corruption problem is a deeply structural one. It's not just a few bad actors. It's actually a system that is shaped by political incentives and institutional weaknesses and social norms. If you look at reports by Transparency International, their corruption index, Iraq consistently ranks low. Iraq ranked 136th out of 182 countries in last year, and this has kind of been consistently the case. And despite having eight consecutive governments over the last two decades, the big picture has not really changed. Corruption has always been entrenched at every level of the Iraqi state. And I think there's widespread agreement that the core driver of corruption in Iraq is the post 2003 power sharing system in government, which is known as the Muhassasa. That's the ethno-sectarian power sharing structure. It was designed to prevent the return of autocracy after the overthrow of Saddam Hussein. But in practice, it really allowed the emerging political oligarchs after 2003 to establish their bases and take root within the systems. So parties embedded themselves inside government ministries and started treating them as party fiefdoms. And then they built around that patronage networks that controlled hiring, contracts, and spending. So this created a system of a complex system of corruption that operates on multiple levels. So at the top, you have ministries that are captured by powerful parties and militias. At the bottom, ordinary citizens face corruption in day-to-day operations of the state, and they face petty bribery. And in the middle, you have legitimate businesses that face extortion and unfair competition from party-linked and militia-linked outfits. If we look at the recent history, major scandals really highlight how resilient this system is. If you go back to the last 2 years, the scandal of that is called the heist of the century, in which more than $2.5 billion were skimmed from the accounts of the tax commission in Iraq, that exposed how political protection and weak oversight allow really large scale, mega scale corruption to flourish. After more than 2 years of investigations and indictments, only a small fraction of the money has been recovered. And the main perpetrators were actually set free and then sentenced in absentia. Basically, they're still at large. But it's not just politics. I mean, one would be missing the full picture if we didn't note that cultural norms are unfortunately also part of the problem. The strong kinship obligations sometimes normalize nepotism and creates a situation also where refusing to engage in corrupt practices to enrich yourself and gain advantage can make someone look like the sucker in a system where everyone actually is taking advantage of the weakness of the system. And on top of that, institutionally, Iraq also lacks independent oversight bodies that could monitor and enforce rules on corruption. Enforcement is often selective and usually targets political rivals while shielding the powerful networks that are in control. And in short, that's really why meaningful reform has been quite difficult in Iraq. It's because of this trilogy, let's say. Corruption is, has political aspects, structural roots, and also systemic dimensions to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, just a couple of things to add that I've observed over time. With Saddam's regime, of course, there is patronage as well, right? So in a sense, that continued after 2003. But the difference is that, and you've heard this from many Iraqi activists, you didn't have one Saddam. Now you had many Saddams.
Yeah, exactly.
And then the cultural aspect, to really appreciate that, that's a challenge because if you are like the one honest guy who's in charge of a contract, then you can be shamed by your own kinship network, by your own
Hmm.
family, because you're not,
Exactly.
like, why aren't you giving us jobs, right? So that's can be serious pressure. So you really have to change the norms, more broadly. So let's get to June 28th. What exactly happened on June 28th? The optics, of course, are interesting. The green zone, the pre-dawn hours. So what happened?
Yeah, on June 28th, Iraqi security forces basically deployed tanks to seal the green zone and launched coordinated raids across the green zone and elsewhere in Baghdad and in several provinces. And according to state media, several dozen officials, 67 at least, of current and former government officials and lawmakers have been arrested on corruption charges. And much of that builds on or was triggered by allegedly confessions that were obtained from former Deputy Oil Minister Adnan al-Jumaili, who was arrested a few weeks prior on corruption charges. To share some of the highlights of what has happened, there seems to be an emphasis on corruption within the oil ministry. And since then, now three senior oil ministry figures have been arrested. Adnan al-Jumaili, we mentioned, and then Ali Ma'arij, a former head of SOMO, the oil marketing company, and most recently, the head of the oil products distribution company was also arrested. This is just this week. At least 12 sitting MPs, members of parliament, have been targeted in the raids. Their immunity was lifted by Speaker Haibat al-Halbusi. Parliament was actually in recess. And there were also some other high profile figures who were targeted, including Bathan al Samurai, who is the head of the Azam coalition, one of the three major one of the three larger political parties within the Sunni Arab community. And there was also former industry minister Khalid Battal, he was also a former planning minister, and as well as former governors of Wasat and Babylon provinces. There were reports that several of the suspects who were about to be arrested somehow were tipped off and were able to flee the country, including, and this has never been, I think, independently confirmed, Hussein Mu'nis, who is a member of parliament from the Hukuk bloc, which represents Kitab Hezbollah. So it's unclear whether this is a red herring or meant to show the campaign in good light, or whether it's true or not. It's unclear. There's a lot of, I think, throughout the campaign, an emphasis on the imagery of large sums of money being carried away by security forces, confiscated from the homes of corrupt officials. So we saw footage with mass security personnel recovering wads of cash, bags of cash, water containers full of cash, all sorts of containers and secret hiding spots buried under gardens, inside machinery, and behind false walls, showing billions and billions of Iraqi dinars. Of course, that you chop out like three zeros when you convert to dollars, in homes of political figures and government officials in the Green Zone and in Adnan Jumaili's residence in Salahuddin province. I think it's important to note that there has been cooperation, I think, between Baghdad and Erbil on this campaign, because several, maybe I think 8 of the suspects were initially detained by authorities in the Kurdistan region in Erbil before being transferred to federal prosecutors. But I think the most important thing that is missing here is that no individuals, no suspects that have direct ties to major powerful militias have been arrested, and no, let's say, top tier political leaders from the coordination framework have been touched by the arrests.
So more like second, third tier, but not that first tier is still the
Exactly.
untouchable. Okay.
The
Um,
people who are paying the rent, not the people who are collecting the rent.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And you mentioned the optics, of course. It's all over social media. There was even like with, I believe, Jumaili, the women caught word and they were trying to burn the cash, trying to destroy the evidence before it was seized. I don't know if
I
that's
haven't seen this
accurate.
one, but that sounds
Yeah,
crazy. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So, so what do the early findings from investigators say?
Well, it seems to suggest that the campaign is focused on recovering as much stolen public funds as possible and attempting to dismantle networks of large scale embezzlement, and comes at a time of financial hardship. So there are reports that are talking about the government trying to catch and release, basically, arrest people who have taken large sums of money from public funds and trade their freedom for the return of the stolen funds to fill at least part of the financial gap, of the budget gap that has resulted from the war, from the Iran war and Iraq's inability to export oil in normal volumes for more than 3 months now. So there are estimates that go as high as $200 billion that the government is trying to recover through this process, but there are no formal or official figures for that. I think another issue or another point that we have seen is that this is likely to expand and even include efforts to recover funds that are stolen and that have been smuggled outside the country. So Iraq has asked Jordan reportedly to extradite several business executives who serve as cashiers for these embezzlement networks and former officials who are wanted on corruption charges. But again, the so far the pattern of arrests suggests that the investigators are targeting political and administrative corruption of relatively vulnerable actors who don't have robust backing. Again, not direct militia contacts and no top tier political operatives here. Mostly second level director general ranks and deputy minister ranks, people who are appointed by the political oligarchs, not the political oligarchs themselves. Despite that, Prime Minister Zaidi promised that the campaign would be far reaching and that he would try to recover all the stolen funds that have been taken over the years. And he made a strong vow that no corrupt officials would be immune from prosecution. But of course, everyone is taking that with a big grain of salt.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. But it's interesting, you alluded to it earlier. The system is under tremendous pressure right now, right? Tremendous pressure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Uh,
what are the public and political reactions so far, and is this being seen as a genuine crackdown?
the public reaction has been positive, especially from the political spheres. So, coordination framework leaders have expressed support for Zaidi's campaign, with some caveats expressed this week. Some political leaders, such as Omar Hakim, were complaining about some of the heavy-handed tactics and the use of tanks in the raids in the green zone, saying this should be reserved for terrorists, not for people who are members of parliament or high-level political operatives who could be summoned or detained through civilian means like civilian law enforcement. So there's a little bit of there are some grumbles there about the methods and imagery that's used, that's associated with the campaign. We've seen also strong support from the Speaker of Parliament, Hebat Halbusi, and part of that could be related to the fact that most of those targeted by the campaign are from rival
Yeah.
political parties. And we also saw support from Muqtada al-Sadr, who spoke positively about the campaign and encouraged Zaidi to keep it up. Washington, I think, has made some encouraging remarks as well, welcoming the moves. But among the public, I think the reaction is quite mixed. Uh, I think many Iraqis are quite excited to see these dramatic raids and the seizures of large amounts of cash, but I think there's also a lot of skepticism because of the long history of selective enforcement in counter corruption or anti corruption efforts in the past. Uh, Again, a lot of the Iraq watchers note that the effort often and most anti-corruption efforts often target political rivals of the most powerful entrenched networks that are in control. Some people are describing it as right sizing of the political process to get rid of some actors that may be weak and ripe for the picking in order to reduce the competition and make the pie larger for those who remain. Of course, again, there is the elephant in the room, which is the absence of any militia-linked figures in the from the list of those arrested, which reinforces doubt about whether this is a systemic effort for reform or simply just political reshuffling.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. No, and I think I share, and a lot of viewers share your cynicism about this. Yeah, it's a question is, can it really lead to the kind of systemic reforms that's needed, as well as the cultural changes that have to happen to bring an end to the corruption? So, how do you assess the purpose and impact of the campaign underway?
Well, I mean, based on uh, prior patterns in Iraq and current situation, I think the campaign appears to have a number of purposes that it could serve. Again, I think one of that could be political consolidation. The arrests seem to disproportionately affect certain blocks and certain actors or within the political game. So while powerful militia aligned networks remain untouched, the weaker, less supported elements are being targeted, and that suggests that the campaign may be a an effort to rebalance political power rather than dismantle the system that enables corruption. Of course, no system is going to dismantle itself out of sheer benevolence. I think there's also important element of public messaging here. The dramatic raids that we saw and the televised seizures of cash and expressions of state power and control with the tanks, I think projects an image of decisive leadership ahead of Zaidi's visit to Washington, D.C., which is happening next week, and also at a time of frustration over corruption. But again, I think the Zaidi's visit to D.C. is quite at the center of this in terms both of establishing state control or the perception of establishing state control and of fighting corruption as a means to attract foreign investment and American businesses back into Iraq. I think clearly here there is lack of parallel institutional reform. And I go back once again to the investigation of the surrounding the heist of the century scandal. I think that gives a stark example of what's missing. During the investigation, both the Integrity Commission and the really top levels of the judiciary publicly accused each other of hiding evidence of and obstructing the investigation. Yet no one from either side was prosecuted. So the credibility of the top anti-corruption bodies in Iraq is really limited and tarnished by past experience. So even if we see some funds recover this time, I don't think the campaign will address these deeper issues. The fact that Muhassasa continues to be the unwritten law of the land, that political parties have captured ministries, and even if you replace a deputy minister or a director general, doesn't change the fact that that party continues to have a stranglehold in that ministry, and the extreme weakness of oversight and law enforcement bodies, and the overarching power and influence of the militias. So I think without structural change, the impact will likely be quite limited and temporary.
Yeah, yeah. It leads me to think of this idea of what genuine regime change looks like, right? These were the ways things were done before. Now there's a change, and this is how things will now be done, right? And in a
Hmm.
sense, that's still that kind of a change hasn't yet happened when it comes to ending this kind of corruption.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
So the bottom line is this: the June 28th raids are dramatic and politically significant, but the real test is what comes next. The war and the enormous losses to Iraq's economy are putting growing pressure on the government and the political system, especially with public salaries and basic state obligations, increasingly at risk. If there's any silver lining, it's that this pressure makes the fight against corruption a defining priority of the Zaidi government. But genuine reforms will require much more than arrests and recovered cash. It will mean confronting the powerful political and militia linked networks that control ministries, contracts, and patronage, and to change the culture of impunity surrounding Iraq's political elites. Whether it becomes a real turning point or another episode of selective enforcement will depend on who is targeted next and whether the government is prepared to challenge the system itself. That is what we will be watching in the weeks and months ahead. So, thanks so much, Omar, for your analysis today.
You're welcome, Eric.
So, thanks so much for watching this latest briefing. You can follow our channel and also go to enablingpeace.org to subscribe to our weekly Isham. Please leave a comment down below. We love the discussion. And thanks so much for joining us. Masalama.
Ma salama.